Commander Ryan Park's heart raced as the shuttle door hissed open. The air of Viridian felt thick and sweet, carrying scents of unfamiliar plants. This was a historic moment, the first official contact between Earth and this newly discovered civilization. Remember, Commander, this is just a preliminary meeting. No treaties, no promises, Admiral Cho had told him before departure. Just establish goodwill. Ryan stepped onto the landing platform where 5 tall, silver-skinned beings waited. Their eyes, large and almond-shaped, watched him with what he hoped was curiosity rather than hostility. "Welcome to Viridian," said the central figure, a female with flowing blue-black hair. Around her neck was an elaborate collar of gold and glittering stones. "I am Nera, first speaker of the southern continent." Ryan placed his hand over his heart, the greeting they had agreed upon in earlier remote communications. "Thank you, first speaker. I am Commander Ryan Park of Earth's Diplomatic Corps. I bring greetings from our people." As they walked toward a gleaming crystal building, Ryan noticed that all Viridians wore collars of varying designs. Some were simple bands of metal, others elaborate creations studded with jewels or intricate patterns. He recalled the briefing files. The collars indicated social position, though the specifics remained unclear. Inside the reception hall, dozens more Viridians waited. Ryan was introduced to officials with titles he struggled to remember. His translator device worked well enough, but cultural context was always the true challenge. "We have prepared a welcome ceremony," Nara explained, guiding him to a raised platform. "It honors both our traditions." The ceremony involved exchanging symbolic gifts. Ryan presented a crystal containing Earth's basic star charts, while the Viridians offered a small sculpture that changed colors with the viewer's mood. Throughout the proceedings, Ryan noticed servers moving silently through the crowd with trays of food and drink. One server in particular caught his attention, a female with striking violet eyes. Her collar was beautiful, but seemed unusually tight, the jewels pressing into her silver skin. Unlike the other servers whose collars were plain, hers featured intricate patterns that seemed out of place. As the event progressed, Ryan observed her struggling to breathe. When she approached with his drink, her hand trembled, and her breathing came in short gasps. "Are you all right?" Ryan asked quietly. "It is nothing, honored visitor," she whispered, but her discomfort was obvious. Minutes later, as she passed behind him, she stumbled. Ryan turned and caught her before she fell. Her free hand clutched at her throat, fingers trying to create space beneath the tight collar. "Please," she whispered, eyes wide with panic. "I cannot." Ryan didn't hesitate. His fingers found the clasp at the back of her collar, a simple mechanism despite its ornate appearance. With a quick movement, he released it and eased the collar away from her throat. The server took a deep, grateful breath. But around them, the room had gone completely silent. Every Viridian stared at them, expressions ranging from shock to horror to, in a few cases, what looked like amusement. Nara approached slowly, her steps measured. "Commander Park," she said, her voice carrying in the silence. "What have you done?" Ryan still held the collar in his hands. She couldn't breathe. The collar was too tight. A murmur swept through the crowd. The server kept her eyes downcast, but Ryan noticed a small smile playing at her lips. "You have removed Hannah's bonding collar," Nara said, her tone a mixture of shock and something Ryan couldn't identify. "According to our most sacred laws, you have claimed her as your life mate." "I'd what?" Ryan looked from Nara to the server, Hannah, and back again. There must be some misunderstanding. "I was helping her." An older Viridian male stepped forward, his collar the most elaborate Ryan had seen. "There is no misunderstanding. The removal of a bonding collar by another is the most binding claim in our society. It dates back to our earliest days." Ryan's stomach sank. "I meant no disrespect to your customs. I saw someone in distress and acted on instinct." "Intentions do not change outcomes," the elder said firmly. "The bond has been established." Ryan looked at Hannah, who finally raised her eyes to meet his. "I apologize for causing this situation," she said softly. "The ceremony is complete," Nara announced to the room. "Commander Park of Earth has taken Hannah of the Scholar class as his life mate. Let it be recorded." The crowd responded with a rhythmic tapping of fingers against collars. Their version of applause, Ryan realized belatedly. His communication device buzzed. The Earth delegation aboard the orbiting ship had been monitoring the reception. "Park, what's happening down there?" "The translators are picking up something about a marriage ceremony." Ryan stepped away from the crowd. "There's been a situation. I helped someone who was having trouble breathing by removing some jewelry. Apparently, that's a marriage proposal here." "Fix this immediately," came the sharp reply. "This mission cannot be compromised by a cultural misunderstanding." When Ryan turned back, Hannah stood waiting, her posture perfect, neck bare where the collar had been. "You must come with me now," she said quietly. As is tradition, Ryan saw Nara watching them closely. Creating a diplomatic incident on first contact was exactly what he'd been ordered to avoid. He nodded stiffly. "I'll sort this out," he told Hannah as they walked toward the exit, followed by curious stares. "This is just a misunderstanding." Hannah's violet eyes held a mysterious gleam. "Perhaps," she replied, "or perhaps it is the beginning of something neither of our worlds expected." As they left the reception hall, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that this accident might not have been accidental at all. Ryan paced across his guest quarters, stopping occasionally to look through the large crystal window at the three moons hanging in Viridian's night sky. 6 hours had passed since the disastrous reception, and his mind still raced with questions. "This is ridiculous," he said, turning to face Hannah. "I was helping you. How can removing a piece of jewelry suddenly make us married?" Hannah sat calmly on a curved seat, her posture perfect. Without her collar, her long neck showed a pale line where the metal had rested. "The collar ceremony dates back thousands of years," she explained. "Before we had written language, it is our most sacred bond. But surely there's a way to undo it, an annulment process." Hannah tilted her head. "Would you ask an Earth couple to undo their marriage vows within hours of speaking them? How would your people view such disrespect?" Ryan sighed and sat across from her. "On Earth, marriages aren't formed by accident. They require consent from both parties. As do ours, typically." Hannah's violet eyes studied him. "The tradition of collar removal comes from our ancient past, when our people lived in tribal groups. If someone removed another's collar, they took responsibility for that person's well-being. So it's more like adoption. It began that way. It evolved into our bonding ceremony." She hesitated. "Commander Park, Ryan, if we're supposedly married, you might as well use my first name." "Ryan." She tested the word. "The diplomatic team from Earth has been in contact with our council. They're quite concerned." "I bet they are." Ryan rubbed his temples. "My superior officer told me to fix this immediately, as if I could wave a magic wand. The council has suggested a compromise. Since you acted without understanding our customs, they will allow a period of assessment. We remain technically bonded, but you are not required to fulfill all traditional obligations." "What obligations would those be?" A hint of silver colored Hannah's cheeks. She was blushing. "Living arrangements, shared property, physical expectations." Ryan cleared his throat. "Right. And this assessment period, how long does it last?" "1 lunar cycle, 30 Earth days." "And then what happens?" "Then you must either confirm the bond or formally reject it. But I must warn you, rejection after the assessment period is considered deeply shameful for the rejected party. I would lose my position. My family would suffer socially." Ryan stared at her. "So I'm trapped. Either stay married to someone I just met or ruin your life." "There is another option," Hannah said quietly. "You could leave Viridian and never return. The bond would be considered abandoned rather than rejected. Abandoning first contact with a new civilization isn't an option for me." The next morning, Ryan agreed to tour the city with Hannah as his guide. They walked through markets filled with strange fruits and crafts, past buildings that seemed to grow rather than be built. "You're a scholar of sinology," Ryan asked as they rested beside a fountain. "What does that involve?" "I study other species and cultures, particularly yours. I have specialized in Earth studies since we first detected your signals. So you know more about me than I know about you." Hannah smiled. "Perhaps, but knowledge from data is not the same as understanding from experience." As they continued walking, Ryan noticed how people reacted to Hannah's bare neck. Some stared openly, others whispered behind their hands. "Is it unusual for someone to not wear a collar?" he asked. "Only bonded pairs may go without collars," she explained. "And most choose to wear them anyway, as symbols of their status. Mine was a scholar's collar." As they approached a large park, Hannah led Ryan to a secluded bench beneath trees with silver leaves. "I must confess something," she said, her voice dropping. "The incident with my collar was not entirely accidental." Ryan stared at her. "What do you mean?" "I adjusted my collar before the reception, made it tighter than normal." "You planned this." Ryan stood up, anger rising. "You trapped me in a fake marriage." "Not fake. But yes, I created the opportunity." Her eyes met his without flinching. "My research suggests humans represent something important to Viridian society." "What could we possibly represent to you?" "Change. Freedom." She glanced around to ensure they were alone. "Our society has become rigid, unchanging. The collar system began as a way to recognize achievement, but over centuries, it evolved into a tool of control." Ryan sat down again, keeping more distance between them. "So you used me to what? Start a revolution?" "To open a door." Hannah leaned forward. "Many Viridians question our traditions privately but fear speaking publicly. An outsider who acts differently creates space for conversation. You should have asked for my help directly. Would you have understood the request? Would your superiors have allowed it?" Ryan didn't answer immediately. She was right. Earth's protocols for first contact strictly prohibited interference in local politics. "What happens now?" he finally asked. "Now we learn from each other. You learn our ways, I learn yours. And perhaps together, we find a path forward that honors both." As they walked back toward the diplomatic compound, a group of Viridian officials approached. Ryan recognized the elder from the reception. "First Counselor Jin," Hannah said with a respectful bow. "Scholar Hannah." The elder's eyes narrowed. "And Earth Commander Park. The Council requests your presence tomorrow. There are concerns about your unusual bonding." After Jin departed, Ryan turned to Hannah. "What does that mean?" "It means the conservative faction is uncomfortable with our situation. They fear change." "What will they do?" Hannah touched her bare neck where her collar had been. "They will test us. And depending on what they learn," she hesitated, "they may use this incident to justify limiting human-Viridian relations." Ryan thought of his mission objectives. "Then we need to convince them our bonding isn't a threat." "Even if it is?" Hannah asked, her violet eyes holding his. "Is it?" Her smile was small but certain. "Every meaningful connection between different worlds changes both, Commander. The question is whether we guide that change or fear it." As Viridian's 3 moons rose higher, Ryan realized that what had begun as a cultural misunderstanding had become something far more complex and potentially more important than any diplomatic mission could have anticipated. Ryan straightened his uniform as he and Hannah approached the council chamber. After 2 weeks on Viridian, he had learned to recognize the subtle signs of status and power in the architecture. The higher the crystal spires, the more important the building. The council chamber's towers stretched so high they seemed to pierce the clouds. "Remember," Hannah whispered, "speak only when directly addressed. The council values patience." Inside, 7 Viridians sat at a curved table. Each wore collars more elaborate than any Ryan had seen before. First Counselor Jin sat at the center, his silver face unreadable. "Commander Park," Jin began, "your presence on our world has created unusual circumstances. I hope to resolve any concerns, Counselor," Ryan replied carefully. Jin's eyes narrowed. "Some believe your actions with Scholar Hannah were not accidental, but a calculated human strategy." "That's not true," Ryan said, perhaps too quickly. Counselor Mina, the only female on the council, leaned forward. "Yet you continue this bonding charade rather than returning to your ship. Breaking the bond immediately would dishonor Hannah," Ryan explained. "I'm following your customs while learning about them." "How convenient," Jin said coldly. "Meanwhile, you gain access to our archives, our technology, our people, through your bondmate." After an hour of questioning, they were dismissed. As they walked through the city center, Ryan noticed 2 Viridians following them at a distance. "They're watching us," Hannah said quietly. "The council doesn't trust me." "It's not just you they distrust." Hannah guided him toward a small building with no crystal spires. "We need to talk somewhere safe." Inside what appeared to be a modest cafe, they sat in a corner booth. The few Viridians present wore simple collars. Workers and traders, Ryan had learned to recognize. "The Grand Archive holds our complete history," Hannah said once they had drinks. "I need to show you something there, but we must be careful. The High Collar Council fears human influence." "Why would they fear humans? We're here for peaceful exchange." Hannah touched her bare neck. "Because your society evolved without collars, without visible symbols of control. That idea alone threatens thousands of years of tradition." Later that day, they slipped into the Grand Archive through a service entrance. Hannah's former position as a scholar still granted her access to certain sections. "Here," she said, activating a viewing screen. Ancient text appeared, alongside images of early Viridians. "These are our earliest records." Ryan studied the images. "They're not wearing collars." The collar system began as temporary markers of achievement. Complete a hunt, wear a collar for a celebration. Discover new knowledge, receive a ceremonial collar. Hannah scrolled through more images. Over generations, they became permanent, then hereditary. "A way to keep everyone in their place," Ryan said. "Exactly. But these early philosophies," she brought up more text. "They speak of equality, of shared purpose. The founding principles were altered over centuries," she explained. "The true history was edited." Ryan leaned closer. "And humans arriving, free of collars, making our own choices, threatens that control." As they left the archive, Ryan felt uneasy. "We're being followed again." They hurried back to the diplomatic compound. Inside Ryan's quarters, he found his communications device missing. "Someone searched while we were gone," he said, checking for other missing items. "The council will use any excuse to expel humans," Hannah explained. "They fear your technology would allow communication outside their control systems." Ryan's backup communicator buzzed. A message from Earth Command. "Situation deteriorating. Conservative elements on Earth questioning value of Viridian contact. Resolve the marriage situation immediately, or we withdraw the mission." "They don't understand what's happening here," Ryan said, showing Hannah the message. "Few do, but there are others who see what we see." She hesitated. "My friend June works in Central Communications. He believes in change. Can we trust him? He removed his collar last week. He risks everything to question the old ways." The next morning, they met June in a quiet garden. He was younger than most Viridians Ryan had met, with an energy that reminded him of eager cadets back on Earth. "The High Collars are planning something," June said without preamble. "They've restricted access to all historical archives and scheduled an emergency planetary address." "To say what?" Ryan asked. "To announce that humans represent a threat to Viridian harmony and must be contained." Hannah's violet eyes widened. "They'll use the bond breaking as proof that humans don't respect our ways." "Exactly," June agreed. They've already begun spreading stories that Commander Park manipulated you, Hana. Ryan paced across the small garden. So either I stay married to Hana forever, or I break it and prove their point that humans can't be trusted. There's another possibility, Hana said slowly. What if we showed everyone the truth? The original teachings about equality, about choice. The archives are locked down, Jun reminded her. But you have access to the broadcast system, Hana countered. Jun looked nervous. For maintenance only, and only under supervision. During the planetary address, Ryan asked, "That might be possible. The supervisors will be focused on the Council's message." That night, Ryan contacted his ship. "I need 24 more hours. Something important is happening." "The diplomats are leaving, Commander," his superior replied. "This mission is being classified as unsuccessful. Return to the ship." "With respect, Admiral, there's more at stake here than diplomatic niceties. Are you refusing orders, Commander Park?" Ryan looked at Hana, who was carefully copying ancient texts onto a small device Jun had provided. "I'm fulfilling our mission's true purpose, understanding this world and its people." The connection went silent for a moment. 24 hours, Park. Then we consider you voluntarily separated from service." After the call ended, Hana touched his arm. "You risk much." "So do you," he replied. "If this fails." "If we fail, nothing changes. The collars remain, Viridian stays isolated, and both our worlds lose a chance to grow." She held up the data device. "But if we succeed, we create a future neither world could imagine alone." As Viridian's 3 moons aligned in the night sky, a rare event Ryan learned happened only once every 30 years. He wondered if the timing was coincidence or something more. A perfect moment for change, when all 3 sources of light worked together rather than separately. The central broadcast hub of Viridian City gleamed in the early morning light. Ryan, Hana, and Joan approached through a service entrance, each trying to appear calm despite the risk they were taking. "The annual address begins in 1 hour," Jum said, checking his portable screen. "All citizens are required to watch. The high collars will announce new restrictions on human-Viridian interactions." "And we'll be ready," Ryan replied. In his pocket was a small device containing the ancient texts Hana had copied, the original philosophies of Viridian society before the collar system became rigid. June led them through narrow maintenance corridors. "I can access the broadcast controls for system checks. That gives us a small window to upload your data." "How small?" Ryan asked. 3 minutes, maybe less." Hana touched the wall where images of past council members were displayed. "My great-grandfather is here. He believed in the old ways, in choice and equality. He tried to speak out and lost everything." "That won't happen today," Ryan assured her. They reached a small control room filled with crystal technology Ryan still didn't fully understand. June sat at the main console and began typing rapidly. "I'm initiating a standard pre-broadcast diagnostic," he explained. "This will give me temporary access to the transmission feed." Ryan handed over the data device. "If we broadcast these ancient texts, could we reach enough people?" "The public broadcast system reaches all homes and public spaces," Hana confirmed. "Everyone will see it." June connected the device. "I'll need to compress the data to send it all during my access window. Some quality may be lost." "The truth is what matters, not how pretty it looks," Ryan said. As June worked, Ryan peered through a small window into the main broadcast chamber. Council members were arriving, adjusting their elaborate collars, preparing for their address. "First Councilor Jin looks angry," Ryan observed. "He knows something is happening," Hana replied. The removal of collars has spread beyond just June. Small protests have formed in the outer districts. "They're starting early," June suddenly announced. "We have less time than I thought." His fingers flew across the controls. "I'm setting the data to transmit during the welcome ceremony. It will appear as supplementary historical context." "Will that work?" Ryan asked. "It should. The system is designed to show supporting information during formal addresses. A door at the far end of the corridor slid open. 2 security officers appeared, their gray uniforms marking them as council enforcers. "Someone's coming," Ryan warned. Joan didn't look up. "Almost done. Just need to set the timing." The officers spotted them and began walking faster. "June," Hannah urged. "Done." June pulled the data device free and handed it back to Ryan. "It's in the system. Nothing can stop it now." The officers reached the control room door. "Maintenance access is restricted during official broadcasts," one stated. "Just finishing system checks," June replied calmly, standing up. "Everything is ready for the council's address." The officer looked suspicious but nodded. "Clear this area immediately." They walked out under the watchful eyes of the security team. As they reached a public viewing area, the broadcast began. First, Councillor Jin's face appeared on large screens throughout the city. "Citizens of Viridian," Jin began, his voice solemn. "Today we address concerns about off-world influences that threaten our sacred traditions." Suddenly, the screen split. Jin continued speaking on one side, but on the other, ancient Viridian texts appeared with translations beneath. "From our earliest days, all Viridians were born free of color, choosing their path through merit and inclination." Jin faltered as he noticed the unexpected addition to his broadcast. He tried to continue, but more historical documents appeared. Images of the first Viridians, color-free and equal. "What is happening?" he demanded to someone off-screen. Across the city, people stopped to watch. The ancient texts continued to appear alongside Jin's increasingly flustered address. The collar was meant as a celebration of achievement, not a permanent marker of status. All may rise or fall according to their actions, not their birth. Ryan watched the faces in the crowd around them. Confusion at first, then interest, and finally, in some, a dawning recognition. "They're seeing their true history for the first time," Hannah whispered. Jin's broadcast abruptly cut off, but the historical texts continued. The emergency system had been triggered, but June's program kept running, showing image after image of Viridian's forgotten past. An older Viridian near them touched his simple worker's collar. "Is this true?" He asked no one in particular. "Were we once free to choose?" Others were asking similar questions. Some touched their collars thoughtfully. A few, mostly younger Viridians, actually removed them. "Security forces are coming," Jun warned, checking his screen. "They're locking down the broadcast hub." "We need to move," Ryan said. As they hurried through back streets, they saw the impact of their broadcast spreading. Small gatherings formed in parks and plazas. Discussions grew animated. In one square, a group of young Viridians stood collar-free, speaking passionately to a growing crowd. "It's working," Hannah said, her violet eyes bright with emotion. "They're questioning, thinking for themselves." An urgent tone came from Ryan's backup communicator. "Commander Park, this is the final warning. The diplomatic situation has deteriorated. All Earth personnel are withdrawing. You have 30 minutes to reach the extraction point." Ryan looked at Hannah. "I'm supposed to leave." "Will you?" she asked simply. Before he could answer, shouts came from behind them. A security team had spotted them. "They're coming for us," Jun warned. They ran through narrow streets, trying to lose their pursuers. Finally, they found shelter in an abandoned building. "The extraction point is near the landing pad," Ryan said, checking his communicator. 20 minutes left. Hannah touched his arm. "Go if you must. You've done more than we could have hoped." "What will happen to you?" To June. "They will try to contain this, claim the documents were falsified." June looked worried but determined. "But too many have seen them now. Questions have been asked that cannot be unasked." Ryan faced Hannah. "I'm sorry I got you into this." She smiled. "You didn't. I chose this path long before we met. The collar I wore was tight for many years before you removed it. Through a window, they could see more security forces gathering. In the distance, the shuttle from Ryan's ship waited at the extraction point. "I have to make a choice," Ryan said. "As do we all," Hannah replied. That is what today was about, the freedom to choose one's own path. Ryan looked between the approaching security forces and the waiting shuttle. Whatever he decided would change not just his life, but potentially relations between two worlds. 6 months had passed since the broadcast that changed Viridian society. Ryan stood in the central plaza, watching as crowds gathered for the signing ceremony. The 3 moons of Viridian hung low in the afternoon sky, visible despite the daylight, a rare alignment that many took as a good omen. "Nervous?" asked Jun, who stood beside him. Like many Viridians now, Jun wore no collar, though some had chosen to keep theirs as personal adornments rather than status markers. "A little," Ryan admitted. "I never expected to be part of something this significant." The plaza had been transformed with flowers and ribbons of all colors. At its center stood a table made from crystal and silver, where the newly formed Viridian Council would soon sign their Charter of Rights. Ryan's decision 6 months ago had shocked everyone. His refusal to board the extraction shuttle. His choice to stay on Viridian, even as Earth recalled all personnel. For weeks, he had no contact with his home world. He'd been declared voluntarily separated from service and essentially abandoned. But as news of Viridian's peaceful transformation spread, Earth's position softened. The changes happening here were too significant to ignore. 2 months ago, a new diplomatic team had arrived, this time to negotiate with a very different Viridian government. "There she is," Jun said, nodding toward the council building. Nera emerged, now leader of the transitional government. Behind her walked Hannah, who had become a key voice in the reform movement. Her work translating ancient texts had earned her a position as historical advisor to the council. The crowd parted as the procession approached the signing table. Ryan noticed how different things looked now. People of all social backgrounds mingled freely. Many wore no collars at all, while others had adopted new styles that represented personal choice rather than assigned status. Commander Park, Nara greeted him formally. Though she still wore a collar, it was simpler than her former one. "Your presence honors us." "The honor is mine," Ryan replied. "And it's just Ryan now. I'm no longer a commander." Nara smiled. "Perhaps not to Earth, but to many here, you remain a symbol of the changes we've embraced." The ceremony began with music, haunting crystal instruments playing melodies Ryan had come to love during his time on this world. Then Nara stepped forward to address the crowd. "Today, we codify what our ancestors always knew, that each Viridian has value beyond any symbol worn around their neck." She raised a crystal tablet. "The Charter of Rights begins with these words. No person shall be bound by the collar of another. All paths are open to those with will to walk them." The crowd responded with the rhythmic tapping that Ryan now recognized as their form of applause. As each council member signed the charter, the tapping grew louder. When the ceremony ended, people moved through the plaza, celebrating. Ryan found himself standing at the edge, watching. For all his involvement, he was still an outsider, a human on a Viridian world. "Deep thoughts?" Hannah asked, appearing beside him. "Just reflecting on how much has changed. When I first arrived, I could never have imagined this." "When you first arrived, you created quite a scandal by removing my collar," she reminded him, her violet eyes twinkling with amusement. Ryan laughed. "Still the most awkward diplomatic incident of my career." They walked through the celebration toward a quieter garden area. Small lights floated in the air, a Viridian technology that still seemed magical to Ryan. "Earth has approved continued diplomatic relations," Hannah said as they sat on a bench beneath silver-leaved trees. "Your superiors were impressed by how peacefully our transition occurred." "They're sending a permanent ambassador next month," Ryan confirmed. "They've offered me a position on the team." "Will you accept?" "I'm considering it." "What about you?" "I hear the new Educational Council wants you to lead the history department." Hannah nodded. There's much work to be done, rewriting our texts with the full truth of our past. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the three moons climb higher in the sky. Ryan had learned that such an alignment was considered particularly meaningful, a time when new bonds were traditionally formed. "And what of our arrangement?" Ryan asked finally. The assessment period ended long ago. Hannah turned to face him. From a small pocket, she removed a simple band of woven silver. "This was the original symbol between equals on my world, before collars, before hierarchy. Not a mark of ownership, but of choice." Ryan took the band, examining its intricate pattern. "It's beautiful. On your world, I believe you have something similar. Rings exchanged as symbols of partnership." "We do." Ryan smiled. "Is this a proposal, Scholar Hannah?" "Perhaps, or perhaps it is recognition of what has already happened." Her silver skin caught the moonlight as she looked up at him. "You removed my collar thinking you were just helping someone breathe easier. Instead, you helped an entire world breathe freely again." Ryan held out the silver band. "In Earth traditions, this would go on a finger, not a neck." "Then let us honor both traditions." Hannah offered her hand. "A new beginning deserves new customs." As Ryan slipped the band onto her finger, cheers erupted from behind them. They turned to find June and several other young Viridians watching from the garden entrance. "Did you plan this?" Ryan asked, laughing. "The alignment of three moons waits for no one," June called back. "We just happened to be in the right place at the right time, much like when a certain human removed a certain scholar's collar." Later that night, as celebrations continued throughout the city, Ryan stood with Hannah on a balcony overlooking the transformed world. Collars no longer defined who could go where or speak to whom. Children played together regardless of their parents' former status. Scholars debated openly with workers, sharing ideas rather than directives. "Do you ever regret it?" Ryan asked. "Setting up that situation with your collar, taking such a risk?" Hannah considered the question seriously. "I regret that I needed such manipulation instead of simply asking for help. But no, I don't regret the outcome." She touched the silver band on her finger. "Some bonds restrict, others liberate. The difference lies not in the bond itself, but in how it is chosen." Below them, the citizens of Viridian celebrated their new charter, their new freedoms. Above, the three moons shone together, their light stronger combined than any could produce alone, much like the unexpected union of two very different worlds.